Meanwhile, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has warned that the escalating confrontation involving the United States, Israel and Iran could destabilize global markets and worsen humanitarian crisis across several regions. UN officials say the conflict has entered its seventh day with fighting reported on multiple fronts and renewed calls for an immediate ceasefire and diplomacy under the United Nations Charter. Humanitarian agencies report deteriorating conditions in Gaza, Lebanon, and the West Bank as displacement rises and aid deliveries face restrictions, fuel shortages, and growing medical needs. Maritime authorities also warn of disruptions along the Strait of Hormuz, a critical route for global oil shipments, leaving thousands of vessels delayed and raising fears of wider economic supply shocks. Joining us on the news to discuss the ongoing conflict in the Middle East is global affairs analyst Alexander von Rugen and economist Femi Onokaren.
Good evening.
You're welcome to the show, guys. Let's get into it. I'm coming to you first, Alex. Now, Iran recently launched missiles towards targets in the Gulf during the ongoing exchange of strikes with Israel and the United States. While many of the projectiles were intercepted over Qatar, Iran's president also issued an apology to neighboring countries, signaling an attempt to contain regional fallout. How does this dual approach reflect Iran's regional strategy, and what might neighboring nations do in response to this?
Because he's reflecting on a strategy or a pre-authorization that had been issued by Ali Khamenei, in the event of his death. And we have to look at the situation that was building up in Iran prior to his death. They did a surgical strike on Khamenei with 40 to 48 of his top leaders assembled in one place at one time. That's tactical suicide. But the reason it happened is the Israeli and CIA, the Mossad and the CIA, had infiltrated the communications within Iran in the military and the higher managing regime with Pegasus software. They had scrambled signals. They had tracked them. They were monitoring the signals of the bodyguards, the drivers, the assistants, the families, so they could pinpoint where they are. They thought the only alternative was to meet together face-to-face to avoid the communication hacks. Well, in the end, that was their demise. They were all killed. So now this has left a disruption in the state because the Khamenei was the supreme leader. He dissected every division of government with numerous councils, of which he had to report directly to him. With the communications shut down and orders to the IRGC and various military battalions that run missile batteries, they had instructions. They were to attack everyone. If this was a death wish of the Khamenei as his last hurrah, or if it was strategy, I guess the truth will come out in the next few weeks. But it's created a chaos in the Middle East, attacking countries like Qatar, which have historically been trying to mediate this situation with America and Hezbollah and Hamas. So these guys are working with pre-authorized instructions. The communications fragmented at best, and in the meantime, America and Israel are being relentless in their continued bombing location military bases. So for Pezeshkian to come and apologize, it's kind of a lame answer, but he's not going to explain their situation. It's a situation of weakness. That's why Trump is taking advantage of it now and demanding an unconditional surrender.
Well, Pezeshkian's apology wasn't really fully an apology, considering the fact that he says we won't attack unless we are provoked. So how do you think other countries are going to be responding to this, especially neighboring nations?
The damage has been done. Look at Dubai. Dubai has really no tactical importance. It doesn't have a major U.S. base. They They have, yes, they have communications and they have some outposts there. But unlike Kuwait or Bahrain, it's not of significance. Yet they were targeting icons of Dubai society: the Burj Khalifa, the Burj Al Arab, the Fairmont Hotel on the Palm, and of course their public airport. There's deep resentment with the Emiratis at this point. I don't think that can be undone.
All right, so let's bring in Femi. Let's focus on economic and global supply shortages that could potentially come out because of this. Now, the Middle East is sitting at the center of some of the world's most critical shipping routes, and that's particularly the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea, both of which handle a significant portion of global oil shipments and commercial cargo. Now that tensions are escalating and fears of military confrontation is growing, markets are closely watching. Now, these maritime corridors are being closely watched. How significant are these routes to global trade, and what would be the immediate economic consequences if disruptions continue to intensify?
It's very, very significant. The Strait of Hormuz holds 20% of global oil trade, and that's a significant portion of global energy demand. If 20% is not delivered, then we're going to have shortages across different sectors. And this is going to affect not just the Middle East, it's going to affect the entire world. Now, the immediate implication is that the price of crude oil will jump up. For some countries, this would prove to be a boon in terms of receipts from crude oil, such as Nigeria. We had planned our budget with $60, and now it's $85. So we have significant improvement. However, it also brings about to the larger global scale inflationary trends, and it depresses all markets. So most people, most investors and businesses would put their money in safe haven investments. We have seen an increase in investments in U.S. Treasury bills, increase in investments in gold and similar platforms, such that they can hedge their bets against the possibility of increased strikes and degeneration into an outright war. It is also important to note that the global economic index has been downgraded by growth has been downgraded by like 0.5%, which means that all things considered, in the kettle that we are in, things are not shaping as well as the transition into a new year, 2026, would have been imagined. We must also consider that this escalation in the Middle East is coming on the back of other significant situations across the globe. There have been the trade tariff wars between the U.S. and China, a 10% flat tariff rate on the whole world. Those things have already been going on. We've had all these challenges with the Ukraine and Russia war, which was also constraining global food supply of some critical grains like wheat and the like. So the world was already in a pretty tight position. The continuance of this war and degeneration to any other level beyond this is going to prove very catastrophic for many markets and for many countries, especially emerging economies.
All right, so coming back to you now, Alexander. Now, the ongoing strikes. We have the U.S. President Donald Trump, and he claimed that Iran's military capabilities, including its army, its navy, and senior leadership, have been largely destroyed. Now, military analysts, however, are suggesting that Iran retains significant strategic assets and proxy networks across the region. Now, from a military standpoint, how realistic do you think this assessment actually is?
Well, it's correct, but the threat level is being dealt with. Let's break it down. Hezbollah, based out of Lebanon, as soon as the leader announced that they were entering the war to support Iran, he was dead within 10 minutes. Israel targeted him, took him out. Israel is now heavily bombing Lebanon, and they've got a ground campaign going into Lebanon as well. Now, also, it's important to note the Lebanese government and their forces are going to work together with Israel in conjunction to abolish or to eradicate Hezbollah in Lebanon, which has literally decimated the country for years now. That's unprecedented. So that's a good move. They're moving forward. Let's look at the Houthis out of Yemen. They're an ally of Iran, and they're staying very quiet right now. After Trump's last attack in May of last year, prior to his meeting in Saudi Arabia to announce the biggest arms deal ever with MBS, he attacked the Houthis, and they decimated most of their installations and their missiles, with Israel's help as well. They're staying quiet now. They realize they're vulnerable, and their source of arms from Iran is compromised because of the war and ongoing attacks in Iran. So I think, and judging by the amount of missile attacks, they're down by about 82%. The drone attacks are down. It would indicate that inventories are being depleted. Now, unless Iran is playing a great bluffing game here, where they have much more in reserve, we don't know. Our intelligence is good through the Mossad integrating itself in Iran, but the actual stockpiles is still in question. And then also there's the Trump card, no pun intended towards the president, but Iran's trump card of a supersonic ballistic missile, which we haven't seen yet, although they allege to have them. Maybe they were taken out in bombings. We don't know. If a supersonic comes to into play here, I would be concerned if I was in Israel. They only have a range of 1,500 kilometers, but Israel's within range.
All right, so we'll take a short break, and when we get back, we're going to continue this discussion. Please do stay with us. You're welcome back, and we're currently discussing the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, and I'm still here with Alexander von Rugen, a global affairs analyst and economist, Femi Onokaren. You guys are welcome back. All right, so Femi, we're coming straight to you. We have international organizations like the United Nations that are coming out to warn that the conflict could trigger broader economic disruptions as way beyond the Middle East, and we've pretty much established that. So we're looking at supply chains that depend on stable energy flows and transport routes that could face serious shocks if the conflict continues to deepen. Now, which sectors, energy, food, or manufacturing, which one of these are the most vulnerable to these potential disruptions?
The most significant one and most immediate one is the constraints on the energy markets. If you have disruption in the supply chain of the energy markets, either in the crude supply or even refined product supply, you risk a global energy crisis. Now, this means that the price of fossil fuel will go up, and the world is very, very dependent on fossil fuel for our production and even for our daily lifestyle and living. So basically, this war in itself is suicidal for the whole globe. The intentions behind it, the geopolitics behind it, they pale in comparison when you consider the consequences to the broader view. And that's what the UN is actually concerned about, because major routes, sea routes, are going to be affected. There will be closed airspaces. So basically, supply chains across the world will be affected. And the world has become so interconnected that impact in one area tend to have significant butterfly effect impact in even areas that one might not immediately associate them with. So there is a growing concern that investment is going to be rationed. People are going to move more into safe haven tools and bills. And this definitely means that we have less cash in circulation, there are inflationary issues, the cost of living is already bad, tariffs are there piling on cost of living for many people in different areas of the world. So, I mean, it becomes really a big issue if the matter is not resolved as quickly as possible. We're hoping for a quick resolution so that the global economy can pick up and we can move into a prosperous phase of the year.
All right, coming back to you now, Alexander. Israel has pretty much confirmed a series of strikes inside Iran, while missile activity and military mobilization continue across parts of the region. Now, with multiple actors involved and tensions rising rapidly, many analysts are warning about the risk of a wider regional war. Now, how close is the Middle East to a broader conflict, and what developments could trigger further escalation?
Well, uh, the trigger effect is Iran bombing all of its neighbors, even the ones considered friendly to Iran. It may be a strategy, but I think it's a big mistake. In terms of regional actors involving into this conflict, Trump has made it clear he doesn't want to put U.S. troops on the ground. He has not ruled it out completely, but he's amassing an alliance of the Kurdish tribes right now in Iran, Iraq, Uzbekistan, or pardon me, Azerbaijan, which are now amassing and forming a militia to be ground forces within Iran and have U.S. Air support and Israeli air support. That's what they're offering, and also they're going to arm them. So this conflict, it basically all roads lead to Iran. The Houthis have been insignificant. Hezbollah in Lebanon, well, they've reared their head again, and Israel's dealing with them very, very quickly. In fact, treating it with ground troops. It's important to note the entire strategy in Iran here is to limit collateral damage. If we look at the amount of missiles that have been shot at Iran, they've all been surgical attacks based on ground intelligence. And the amount of civilian casualties for a war of this magnitude is unprecedented as being low, very low. U.S. losses in manpower, military manpower, again, they've lost 6 soldiers. I mean, this is war. Previous wars have had huge, huge fatality numbers. But this one, Trump is trying to somewhat keep his status as the peace president, even though he's excusing it that you have to go to war to get peace. But their tactics have been out of respect for the civilians, knowing that the average Iranian is not the enemy here. It's the regime that has to change. So again, that as far as the global input goes, France, Italy, Spain are all sending Navy ships to the Mediterranean because of Iran's attempted bombing on Cyprus. I think most of that is symbolic. Cyprus also has no strategic advantage to Iran, and they don't pose a threat. They had a British base there.
All right. Sorry, let's come to Femi. Now, there are many developing economies that are relying heavily on imports, especially fuel and food. Now, the Middle East has remained a crucial supplier and, of course, a transit hub for this. If it is exposed to prolonged instability within the region, could there be ripple effects far beyond the battlefield? Now, how might sustained tensions translate into inflationary pressures and currency volatility in import-dependent economies?
Basically, supply chain is the lifeblood of, any economy, any business. And once you stifle it, you risk choking the entire framework. As it is right now, with the continued issues going on in the Middle East and the significance of the trade pathways that runs through those areas, the fact that the owners of assets around there are going to protect their assets and keep them off course, would have a decline in general global trade with a lot of people taking caution. This would also translate to significant losses for those who had already invested in terms of obligations due to their suppliers, to their buyers. And, all this means that inflation is going to rise up. We'll have too little to meet up with heavy demand. And currencies are already under a lot of strain because of the ongoing global economic frame. This adds additional pressure. And the pressure that it provides, it's going to teeter the world all over again. We just found some balance after the COVID years, just about 5 years ago, found some economic balance. The world is rolling in the right direction. This conflict will best served if it can be closed quickly. And all the parties involved can actually come to an amicable resolution, because the economic impact goes far beyond. For example, towards the African continent, we're going to have significant inflationary pressure on almost all the countries around because of dependence on imports and low productivity generally. And now if the supply chain is constrained, it means that prices of goods and services will go up. In Nigeria, as an example, with the increase in price of crude oil, some of the crude rather that Dangote refinery refines, they're imported, and the increase in, it will have a decrease in supply and increase in prices, which means that it will automatically transmits that cost to the consumers, which means cost of transportation, cost of production is going to go up. And naturally, that also brings additional inflationary pressure across the board. So it's really a war that needs to be settled as quickly as possible and escalation prevented. At this point, the world is not in a good enough shape considering the issues that we just escaped from, the COVID years, just entering stability, to embark on something like this that would have to go through the same supply chain challenges and production challenges and rising security. There's also the concern that some of the dissidents in some of these other neighboring countries would migrate to other African nations. Now, this would also, and nations around them, this would create security threats, which will bring down the global, specific country-specific and global investment range. Investors will not be happy going into countries that are not safe. They will not want to risk their funds in those markets. And, at the same time, countries dependent on things like tourism will see a significant drop in revenue since more people are going to be constrained to go to those places. Dubai has lost close to 56 billion in just this short period of time in terms of damages and tourism, revenue loss. So I believe that managing the position well and coming to an amicable position is a war that is not beneficial for everyone at all. It might serve some geopolitical interest, but in terms of the economics, it's not a very good look, for the whole world. We hope that it comes to an end quickly.
All right. So that was global affairs analyst Alexander von Rugen and economist Femi Onokaren discussing the current conflict between the United States, Israel and Iran, which so far has only continued to escalate, with neither one of the nations extending an olive branch of peace. But we will continue to monitor the situation and continue to analyze it. Thank you very much, gentlemen.